about the need to engage in both combat and civil affairs in a new form of warfare to follow an age of victory parades and what he called cinema heroics, about an enemy with complete freedom of action, allowed to do what we didn't dare, and about the danger of creating a sect of singularly brave iron men, whose ideals were so exalted that beyond the battlefield they had a tendency to become woolly-headed. Larteguy dedicates his book to the memory of Centurions who died so that Rome might survive, but he notes in his conclusion that it was these same Centurions who destroyed Rome. Born in 1920, Jean Larteguy, a pseudonym, his real name was Jean-Pierre Lucien Hosty, fought with the Free French and afterward became a journalist. Because of his military experience and resistance ties, he had nearly unrivaled access to French paratroopers who fought at Dien Bien Phu and in the Battle of Algiers. His empathy for these men, some of whom were torturers, made him especially loathed by the Parisian left, even though he broke with the paratroopers themselves out of opposition to their political goals, which he labeled neo-fascism. Larteguy eventually found his military ideal in Israel, where he became revered by paratroopers who translated the Centurions into Hebrew to read at their training centers. He called these Jewish soldiers the most remarkable of all of war's servants, superior even to the Viet, who at the same time detests war the most. By the mid-1970s, though, he became disillusioned with the Israel Defense Forces. He said it had ceased to be a manageable grouping of commandos and was becoming a cumbersome machine, too dependent on American-style technology, as if foreseeing some of the problems with the 2006 Lebanon campaign. I remember walking into the office of a U.S. Army Special Forces colonel in South Korea and noticing a plaque with Larteguy's famous Two Armies quote. The translation is by Zan Fielding, a British Special Operations officer who, in addition to rendering Larteguy's classics into English, was also a close friend of the late British travel writer Patrick Leigh Fermor, to whom Fermor addresses his introduction in his own 1977 classic, A Time of Gifts. In The Centurions, one of Larteguy's paratroopers declares, "I'd like two armies. One for display, with lovely guns, tanks, little soldiers, fanfares, staffs, distinguished and doddering generals, and dear little regimental officers. An army that would be shown for a modest fee on every fairground in the country. The other would be the real one, composed entirely of young enthusiasts in camouflage battle dress, who would not be put on display, but from whom all sorts of tricks would be taught. That's the army in which I should like to fight." But the reply from another character in the Centurions to this declaration is swift. "You're heading for a lot of trouble." The exchange telescopes the philosophical dilemma about the measures that need to be taken against enemies who would erect a far worse world than you, but which nevertheless are impossible to carry out, because of the remorse that afflicts soldiers when they violate their own notion of purity of arms, even in situations where such tricks might somehow be rationalized. They may win the battle, but will surely lose their souls. Rather than a roughneck, this Army Special Forces colonel epitomized the soft, indirect approach to unconventional war that is in contrast to direct action. The message that he and other professional warriors have always taken from Larteguy's famous Two Armies quote, rooted in Larteguy's own Vietnam experience, is that the mission is everything, and conventional militaries, by virtue of being vast bureaucratic machines obsessed with rank and privilege, are insufficiently focused on the mission, regardless of whether it is direct action or humanitarian affairs. Of course, the conventional officer would reply that the special operator's field of sight is so narrow that he can't see anything beyond the mission. "They're dangerous," one of Larteguy's protagonists says of the paratroopers, "because they go to any lengths beyond the conventional notion of good and evil. For if the warrior's actions contradict his faith, his doubts are easily overcome by belief in the larger cause." Larteguy writes of one soldier, "He had placed the whole of his life under the sign of Christ, who had preached peace, charity, brotherhood, and at the same time he had arranged for the delayed action bombs at the Cat B airfield. What of it? There's a war on, and we can't allow Hanoi to be captured." Vietnam, like Iraq, represented a war of frustrating